All right, we're going to get into two of the absolute pillars of marketing: value proposition and brand positioning. And for this explainer, we're basing our thinking on the fantastic frameworks from Alexander Chernev, a professor of marketing over at Northwestern University. It's so important to get these right because, really, if you don't nail these two concepts, pretty much everything else you do in marketing is built on a shaky foundation.
Exactly. And it all comes back to this one question. It seems so simple, but it is the absolute core of any brand strategy. Every single thing a business does, from how they design their products to the ads they run, it all has to be in service of answering this one thing. When a customer has a million options, why on earth should they choose you? And the strategic answer to that why you question, well, that's what we call the value proposition. You can think of it as the fundamental promise that your brand is making. It's the reason for being, the reason for choice, that a company crafts to explain why it's the best option out there.
Yeah, and I love this definition because it's so much more than just a list of features. Notice that word, sum. It's a balance. It's the sum of benefits and costs. The value isn't just about what a customer gets. It's about what they get in return for what they have to give up. And that give up part, that isn't just money. It could be their time, their effort, the mental space it takes to learn your product.
That's such a key point. And that whole value equation is really pulled and pushed by these three forces. First, it all has to start with what the customer actually needs. If you're not solving a real problem for them, you have no value, period. Second, you have to look at how your brand's benefits directly address those needs. And third, and this is the one people often forget, how do you stack up against the competition? Value is never created in a vacuum. It's always relative to the next best choice.
And that idea of relative value leads us to this incredibly useful way of thinking about the competitive landscape. You can basically take any brand's value proposition and sort its attributes into these three buckets: points of dominance, points of parity, and points of compromise. Okay, so let's start with points of dominance. These are your knockout punches. This is where your brand is clearly, undeniably better than your rivals on something that customers actually care about. This is your competitive advantage. I mean, the classic example here is Volvo. For decades, their point of dominance was safety. If that was your number one thing as a car buyer, the choice was basically made for you. Right. Then you've got points of parity. Think of these as the table stakes, the absolute minimum requirements you need to even play in the game. You're not going to win customers with these features, but you will definitely lose them if you don't have them. A great example of this is network coverage for cell phone carriers. 20 or 30 years ago, having the best coverage was a huge point of dominance. Today, it's just expected. It's a point of parity. And finally, points of compromise. These are the trade-offs. It's what a customer knowingly gives up or accepts in order to get your points of dominance. It is, by definition, your competitive disadvantage. The most common one is price, right? To get the incredible design and status of a luxury product, you compromise by paying a much higher price. And being really honest about these compromises is just as important as knowing your strengths. So the takeaway here is that a brand's total value proposition includes all three of these things: the good, the standard, and the not so good. But that creates a really big strategic question, doesn't it? You can't just go out and talk about everything all the time. Your marketing would be a total mess. So how do you decide what to actually focus on? This is the critical leap from the big, broad value proposition to the sharp, focused idea of brand positioning. This slide lays it out perfectly. Your value proposition is, like we said, the whole inventory of what your brand is. But brand positioning, that's the strategic choice. It's about looking at that whole inventory and deliberately picking the most important, most powerful benefit, usually your point of dominance, and making that the star of the show. Your goal is to own one very specific and valuable piece of real estate in your customer's mind.
And that means positioning is, at its heart, an act of sacrifice. It's about being disciplined enough to not talk about some of the good things your brand does so you can make your greatest thing absolutely unforgettable. This brings us to the first big strategic choice you have to make. Just how many benefits are you going to try and promote?
The most common and, frankly, often the most powerful strategy is single benefit positioning. You pick one thing, your primary point of dominance, and you just hammer it home again and again and again. I mean, look at BMW. They make cars that are luxurious, they're safe, they're beautiful, but for decades, what have they talked about? One thing: performance, the ultimate driving machine. It's an absolute masterclass in cutting through all the noise.
The flip side of that is multi-benefit positioning. This is where you try to stake a claim on two or even more attributes. Target's slogan, "Expect more, pay less," is the perfect example. They're making a claim about both quality and design, that's the expect more part, and a claim about price, the pay less. It's incredibly difficult to pull off, but if you can actually deliver on both promises, it can be a killer combination. The risk, of course, is that customers don't fully believe either claim. And then there's a third way, holistic positioning. Here, you're not really talking about specific features at all. Instead, you're making this big, broad claim about overall superiority. Gillette's "the best a man can get" is the classic here. It's not about the number of blades or the pivot head technology, it's just a raw assertion of market leadership. This is a real power move, and it's usually only an option for brands that are already the clear leader in their category. Okay, so once you've figured out how many benefits you want to talk about, the next choice is about what kind of benefit you're going to put front and center. The actual nature of the promise you're making to the customer matters a lot. And you can really boil them down into three categories. You've got functional benefits. This is what the product physically does. Tide gets your clothes whiter. Then you have monetary benefits, which is all about saving or making money. Think Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more. And then you have psychological benefits. This is all about how using the brand makes a customer feel. It's that feeling of safety you get from Allstate, or the sense of adventure from a brand like the North Face. Now, this slide right here, this might be one of the most important concepts in all of branding. What this chart shows is how sustainable each of those benefit types is as a real competitive advantage. And it makes perfect sense when you think about it. A monetary benefit, like a low price, is the easiest thing in the world for a competitor to copy. They just change a number. A functional benefit, say a better camera on a phone, that can be copied too. It just takes some time and R&D. But a psychological benefit, how do you copy the feeling of trust or status that a brand has spent decades building? You can't. And that's why those emotional connections create the strongest, most durable brand advantages. Which brings us to our third and final strategic choice, framing. So it's not enough to just pick your benefit. You also have to decide what you're comparing it to. You have to create a frame of reference that gives your benefit some context and meaning in the customer's world.
Yeah, you have to set the stage. A common way is a need-based frame. Snickers isn't just positioning itself against other candy bars, it's positioning itself as the solution to hunger. Or you could use a user-based frame, like Pepsi did so brilliantly with the choice of a new generation, framing themselves as the brand for young, modern people. And then, of course, there's the direct competitive frame. Dollar Shave Club built their entire company by positioning themselves directly against the big, expensive incumbent, Gillette. That's a classic challenger brand move. You almost never see a market leader do that. Why give your smaller competitor the attention?
And ultimately, all of these choices, how many benefits, what kind of benefits, how you frame them, it's all driving toward a single endpoint. And it's captured perfectly in this famous quote from Morisachi about one-word equity. The entire game of positioning is to fight for and own one powerful idea in the customer's mind. When I say safety, you think Volvo. When I say search, you think Google. That is the endgame. And that really is the final question you have to ask yourself. After you've done all the analysis, you've studied your customers, you've mapped your competitors, you understand your own strengths, it all has to be distilled down to this one simple thing. If your brand could own just one word in the mind of your customer, what would that word be?